In recent times, between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, there have been a number of meetings that have taken place and declarations, including on the last occasion when President Biden visited India for the G20 summit, and on the previous occasion when the Honorable Indian Prime Minister visited the United States. And an important element of the increasingly closer relationship between the United States and India is about the relationship in critical technologies. The ICET element of the relationship is one of the key elements which the government of India is pursuing. I'm aware that this is something that has support at the highest levels of government in both countries and is something which is extremely significant in the context of how knowledge spreads and how we intend to see the world evolve. It's also very important from the perspective of India taking its rightful place in the knowledge creation in key sectors, and especially the sector we are dealing with today is amongst the most key in the way that it influences lives of everybody in the world. Electronics manufacture, for instance, is poised to become, if it hasn't already become, the largest manufacturing sector in the world. Amongst all sectors, it's the largest manufacturing sector. And as I was looking through the 5 subjects which have been identified for collaboration, you find that they address very, very key elements of this ecosystem. I'm probably the one person in this particular room who's the outsider to this. All of you are from the scientific fraternity. I cannot by any stretch of imagination claim to be a part of the scientific community. I'm a career civil servant. But having said that, I think from a policy perspective, government understands the importance of this sector in every sense of the word. Government also realizes the importance of this sector in terms of the impact that it is likely to have on lives of people across the world. Everybody today uses electronic devices. Everybody today is influenced by the potential good that electronic devices can do for them, and everybody can be affected by the potential harm that they can do. So in that sense, the subjects you're discussing, including the subject relating to cybersecurity, is of great and grave concern to the world. And the other element of what definitely the Government of India is trying to do, and the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology is trying to do, is to bring in various elements of the value chain into India. Today, electronics value chains, the way the world has evolved, are distributed across the world. It's often said that by the time you manufacture a computer chip, you probably cross the border 70 times, crossed an international border about 70 times. That's how integrated the value chains are. But in today's circumstances, you also find that while on the one hand, you want the specialization, you want the integration of global value chains, you want to make sure that it is produced in the most efficient way possible in the places which are most competitive to produce it, you also need resilience of the same value chains. You also need alternatives in terms of not only where the production, actual physical production can take place, but where the intellectual work on this, the work relating to design can take place. India has already started taking its place in this overall design framework. We are aware that a large number of research and development centers are coming up in India, including of many American companies. We are aware that there is a large scientific manpower base here which can support research across the world, not just pure industrial and commercial research, but also scientific research of the kind that is being attempted through this research collaboration which we are discussing here today. So I think this is an initiative and this is a venture which has taken a long time to come. But now that it is here, it is a model which is worth replicating in other fields and in other areas of scientific research. And I think it's a matter of great pride to MEITY that we are in the forefront of a novel effort. And let me once again thank NSF for having collaborated with us, and all the work over the past year or so with my predecessor, with all my colleagues in the ministry, have paid off here today. I'm aware that the Honorable Minister for Electronics and Information Technology has been personally interested in this. He mentioned to me specifically, because he's also the Minister in charge of communications, that people from the communications ministry should also be involved in this entire exercise. They need to be invited and they need to sort of look at this possibility as well. That is the level of personal interest that is there in this particular effort that we are launching here today. And definitely from the Government of India's side and from the ministry's side, we are fully committed to this particular effort and this venture. And we really look forward to this innovative mechanism where there would be an Indian researcher collaborating with a researcher from the United States on each of these projects. And we expect that the outcomes will be significant and will take us into newer areas where further collaborations of this nature get strengthened and it results in terms of significant outcomes. Recently, the Honorable Prime Minister, while addressing the Indian Mobile Congress, made the point that, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were takers of technology when the mobile phone revolution came up, when in the initial stages. By the time we come to 5G and 6G, Indian researchers are almost on par with what is happening globally. And this is one more opportunity. I find that that's an important topic of research here today, and this is one more opportunity which we can take up. We are supporting the semiconductor research area through significant grant program. This is clearly another area where significant collaboration is possible, and it really needs to go forward. Likewise, in renewable energy and sustainability, particularly in both solar PVs and wind energy, there's been significant work which has been done in India, and India's potential is substantial. So in each of these 5 areas of research that have been outlined, they are critically important, not just for the 2 countries, but for the world at large. And clearly, this joint effort that we are launching here today will benefit not just the 2 countries, but populations globally. And the leadership position that both the United States and India can take in this regard would be very, very significant for what we do for the world. It's, like I said, it's a matter of great pride. Let me once again welcome all the representatives from NSF and the academic institutions who are present here this morning. And I really hope the outcome of this workshop leads to much greater strides in this, and we see a very rich and diverse set of proposals, which is difficult to choose from by the time the deadline ends on January 5th. And I really wish that those who have to make a pick out of those proposals have their work cut out for them by the end of this process. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Sri S. Krishnan, Secretary MEITY, for gracing this morning by your words. A round of applause for him, ladies and gentlemen. Now, may I please request Sean Ruth Chief of Environment Science and Technology, US Embassy, for remarks on this workshop. Please help me to welcome Sean Ruth on dais, everybody.
Good morning. My name is Sean Ruda. I'm the Environment, Science, Technology, and Health Unit Chief at our embassy here in New Delhi. And on behalf of Ambassador Garcetti, I'd like to echo the Secretary's words to welcome all of you to this collaboration that we on the embassy's part are very excited about. It's a pleasure for me personally to be here and also alongside our dear colleagues from the United States National Science Foundation. Before I begin, I did want to say very briefly, having been, because I, like the Secretary, am a career Foreign Service officer, diplomat, but I'm a longtime admirer of our own National Science Foundation in the United States. And I can say, with the current enthusiasm and energy, we are very fortunate in Director Panchanathan to lead that organization. And his staff have been very forward-leaning in making things like this happen, as exemplified by Dr. Kumar. I'd also like to profoundly thank the Ministry of, and Mr. Secretary specifically, for putting all of this together here today, because we wouldn't be able to do this without the close collaboration with MEITY. Once again, and like the Secretary, I would like to, if I may, for all of you, zoom out a little bit. This collaboration is not an event in isolation or in a vacuum, right? We've been brought together here today because of ICET. I've recently heard some people taken to calling it ICE-T, but however you pronounce the acronym, the United States-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology genuinely has the power, we believe, to radically transform the bilateral strategic partnership and advance our shared interests, not just as nations, but for the globe. Last year, as was mentioned in Tokyo, President Biden and the Honorable Prime Minister framed an ambitious vision for ICET, or ICE-T. And here in Delhi, Ambassador Garcetti has listed it repeatedly as one of his top priorities for his tenure as the leader of our mission in India. So that includes not just the embassy here in New Delhi, but our 4 consulates general in Hyderabad, Calcutta, Chennai, and Bombay. Our 2 leaders envisioned a US-India technology partnership that would connect us, that would protect us, and that would detect unseen threats that threaten both of our peoples, from viral, bacterial threats all the way to massive cyber intrusions. They imagined working together as democracies to build an open, accessible, and secure technological ecosystem for collaboration and innovation on the leading elements of technology, not just today, but those that we envision for tomorrow, especially in the fields of biotech, quantum, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and more broadly on defense tech cooperation and even co-production. Collaboration in these areas covered by ICET, which my unit has the overall charge for at our embassy, creates an opportunity for us to evolve this relationship from bilateral partners to global development, again, for the global good. As with all technology, true efficaciousness comes from its interoperability. Luckily, our shared experiences given the United States and India a tremendous base of that interoperability to work from. And that's why we're so excited about collaborations like this. If I may, I'd like to take just a second to ask all those who traveled from the United States for this event to please stand up and be recognized. Gentlemen, yeah, ladies, okay. Yeah, this is not a small thing, thank you. It may seem like, oh, well, they just got on a plane and showed up in India. They're eating great food, they're having a great time. But in fact, this is a manifested, demonstrable impact of the collaboration that's been talked about at the highest levels. This is not something that our government takes lightly. This is not just another initiative. And I know on the part of the government of India, not just at MEITY, but all across the government of India, this initiative on critical and emerging technology, this United States-India initiative, really does have the power not just to bring researchers together, not just to direct research and research funding, but also to genuinely elevate the status of our strategic partnership bilaterally. We live in exciting times where economic and social challenges can be overcome, we believe, by human ingenuity. Finding ways to promote, sustain, and disseminate the benefits of this innovation is a top priority, not just for our own governments, but really for all governments. As is the need to work with the private sector to ensure that appropriate incentives for innovation are created and respected. We believe very strongly that these are achievable and realistic goals. And finally, it's exciting to see US and Indian researchers like yourselves joining hands across the Indo-Pacific to develop solutions in these areas, especially semiconductors, cybersecurity, next-generation communication, networking, sustainability, and green technology, including green energy development and intelligent transport systems. I don't know how many of you are following, relatedly, the e-bus initiative between our two countries. So again, finally, I'd like to thank again the Ministry, thank you, MEITY, and the National Science Foundation for promoting and supporting these partnerships. And I would like to conclude by saying that a strong US-India partnership is key to a free and prosperous Indo-Pacific and world. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sean, for your wonderful insights. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome for the vote of thanks on dais Shri S.K. Marwa, GC and RD in CC and BT. Please help me to welcome Mr. S.K. Marwa on dais, ladies and gentlemen, for vote of thanks.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I think the Secretary had to leave because of another meeting that was rescheduled. So I welcome all of you. Respected Secretary, Mr. S. Krishnan, Mr. Mohan Kumar, the lead program director NSF, my colleague Sunita Verma on the dais, group coordinator electronics and IT, distinguished professors, researchers, and participants from both USA and India, Mr. Sean Rotha from the US Embassy, officials of Government of India, DG CDAC, ladies and gentlemen, the monumental step taken by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India, and the US National Science Foundation in establishing the implementation agreement for interdisciplinary research and innovation is indeed a pivotal moment. The research agency partnership is a testament of our collective efforts to overcome international research barriers and streamline administrative complexities. By aligning research pursuits, synchronizing review processes, and allowing funding agencies to maintain control over the respective awards, we are poised to propel the trajectory of our joint research projects. Our efforts aspire to build scientific and engineering foundations that enable sustainable and connected communities, thereby fostering technological innovations with a widespread impact. I take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thanks and appreciation to all the participants at the two-day MEITY NSF Research Collaboration Workshop, whose collective presence at the workshop will make significant contributions for high-quality research in identified areas. Your dedication and enthusiasm have laid a robust foundation for the success of this joint venture. Thank you for your invaluable contributions and unwavering support. I extend my heartfelt thanks to Secretary MEITY for honoring us with his presence and his impactful address, underlining the crucial role of R&D in economic growth and emphasizing collaborative efforts. My sincere appreciation extends to Mr. Mohan Kumar, Lead Program Director, NSF, for his informative opening remarks, as also the observations and comments of Mr. Sean Rotha from the Embassy of USA. I thank the entire team at NSF, the officials of the US Embassy, for numerous virtual meetings we had to make this important workshop a reality. My sincere thanks to my colleagues at MEITY, Mrs. Sunita Verma, Mrs. Tulika Pandey, our entire R&D teams of scientists at MEITY who worked tirelessly to organize this workshop. Last but not the least, our gratitude extends to the media for covering this event. With great anticipation, we look forward to the proceedings filled with insightful discussions and collaborative efforts. I extend my warm wishes for a fruitful workshop. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for the warm words. Thank you. Now, may I request Mr. Mohan Kumar, Lead Program Director, NSF, to share his insights and take us through the presentation. Please help me to welcome Mr. Mohan Kumar on dais, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the wait. My apologies for the slight mishap. It turned out to be good. It is a blessing in disguise that I was not able to present earlier because the secretary had to go at 10:40. He had a hard stop, and it would have delayed his departure if I had continued with my slides. So, as you might have realized when I started talking earlier, that I cannot talk without slides. I am a professor by profession. I work for the NSF on deputation from my university. I'm going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of the collaboration that we have between NSF and MEITY. Okay, thank you. So, for those of you who are new here, on the NSF page, you can look for what we call as the Dear Colleague letter, and the number is 2023-139. You can look for that, and the details of writing the proposal, submitting the proposal, or for the US investigators and also for the Indian investigators who are collaborating with the US investigators. So this is the call for proposals that is published on the NSF page. I will not repeat some of the words that have been said earlier. Back in May 2023, the implementation arrangement was signed by Director Panchanathan of NSF and the Secretary of MEITY at that time. This was created as a framework to encourage collaboration between US and Indian researchers. And the objective is for the US and Indian investigators to write one single proposal. So when I say one single proposal, they will be identical in terms of the title, the summary, description, and references. And each and MEITY have their own other requirements in terms of budget and other supplementary documents. They can be separate. But the core of the proposal has to be identical from both sides. And in the end, those who receive, when proposals are selected for award, US researchers will receive funding from the NSF, and the Indian researchers will receive funding from MEITY. This is just a flash. This is the Dear Colleague letter that is published on the NSF page. You can go and look over there. And this is the corresponding announcement from MEITY. Again, this is a snapshot of the call for papers from MEITY. These are the focus areas, and we have heard about these focus areas repeatedly since we started today, so I will not read through this. These are all interesting areas, and in particular, in the context of what has been said this morning by the Secretary as well as Sean Rutha, these are areas of extreme importance, both to the US and to India. And all these areas are also relevant to industry. And that is one of the reasons that we are encouraging transitions such as development of prototypes, pilot scale demonstrations, test beds, and field deployment in each of these proposals or the research that is carried out in any one of these areas. And the Indian investigators in particular are encouraged to collaborate with testbed providers, with local communities, and industry partners. I would like to stress a few items here because when you write the proposal, investigators and researchers will focus on writing a quality proposal, but sometimes they miss some of the requirements in terms of the budget limit, in terms of the number of proposals they can submit in a given year, and so on. So it is very critical that if you are writing your proposal to a particular program, for example, cyber physical systems, I would encourage you to look at the call for proposals for cyber physical systems and follow the guidelines there, because we have multiple directorates and divisions from the NSF participating in this initiative, and it is critical that you follow the guidelines that are published in the corresponding program's solicitation initiative. And therefore we see colleagues here both from India and from the US from different disciplines, not just computing. And by the way, just for those who may be new to this, the cyber physical systems, as well as cyber secure and trustworthy cyberspace, SATC as we call it, these are two programs that are multi-directed programs at the NSF, and they are common to both DST and MEITY. The US investigators will submit their proposals to the NSF, and the Indian investigators will submit their proposals to MEITY. Okay, there are separate, these are separate submissions, but the core of the proposal, as I said earlier, will be exactly the same. So I encourage you to go to the website, particularly the NSF website, to look for directions about writing the proposal. And the proposal should conform to the guidelines of a given program. And the deadline for, or the target date for submitting the proposals is January 5. A little bit about the workshop. Sunita Madam already mentioned earlier this morning about the framework of the workshop. We had two seminars preceding this workshop, one in September and one in early October. And the seminars were well attended by US and Indian investigators. And we had planned to have this workshop right at the beginning. And this workshop is a platform. We have been hearing from colleagues from both countries that it is nothing like in physical contact, physical communication, in-person communication or discussions with collaborators. Okay, and that is the reason why we are having this workshop. And I would like everybody from India as well as from US to utilize this opportunity. Okay, we have a few investigators from the US as our US Embassy representative, Sean Rotha, requested the US participants here to stand up. So we have about 7 or 8 of them from here, and with great difficulty, we were able to convince these researchers from the US to come to India. Okay, this is not an easy time of the year for people to travel from the US. All of them are academics, so they are teaching, and this is almost towards the end of the semester with busy teaching schedules and the research activities. They have taken time to come here and be here and collaborate in these discussions with Indian colleagues. And we have a good mix of researchers from the US. I can see similar representation from the Indian side as well. We have very senior professors who are known in their field for a long time, which you are going to see very soon in the invited talks, in the panels, and so on. We have researchers in different areas. We have the researchers in cybersecurity, a good mix of researchers that we have from the US, even though the number is small, but we have addressed the diversity issue. So I wanted to mention diversity in the context of NSF. NSF and the administration at NSF, including our director Panchanathan, are very, very keen, and they are putting in maximum effort to ensure that there is participation from groups from all across the nation, from groups from all different cultural backgrounds, from different universities, and so on. So that is, and I'm glad that we do have good diversity among the 6 or 7 persons that we have from the US. I'm sure it is the same from the Indian side as well. It is nice to see that when I left India in '92, there were probably in a workshop like this about 100 people. There used to be just 1 or 2 women in the audience. But today it is nice to see there are maybe about 10 or 15, I don't know if I can count right here, and it is nice to see a large number of women participating in these activities. And I would like you to go back and encourage others to join as well in the future, and also in writing the proposals. I was digressing. The workshop has several invited talks. We have several talks that will be given in person here by Indian researchers as well as US researchers. 2 of our researchers are here in person to give these invited talks, and some of them will be joining remotely. Although they are joining remotely, we should appreciate the fact that some of them are getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning to give their live presentation, and some of them are staying awake till midnight to give their presentation. So I would like you to be available here and present and listen to their talks and benefit from that. And similarly, we have a very, very strong panel. Professor Sajal Das has created a very robust panel with 4 researchers, 2 from India and 2 from the US. I will let Sajal and other colleagues talk more about the panel. Again, this is something that you cannot afford to miss being here. And the panel is about collaboration, international collaboration, and industry partnerships, which is one of the main themes of the NSF MEITY collaboration. So I would encourage each and every one of you to be here and utilize. You have been here, you have come here to the workshop. You might as well make full use of it. And these opportunities don't come very frequently. And in addition to that, we have group discussions and brainstorming sessions. And these will start at 5:30 p.m. today. So we have 1.5 hours dedicated for the brainstorming session. So we would like to have 5 groups separated out. These groups will be discussing in parallel. They will look at different problems, whether it is the research challenges they are facing in their particular research area, or the challenges they are facing in terms of the collaborations. So again, this workshop, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi would like to see the collaboration between researchers in the US and India. And similarly, the Director Panchanathan from NSF and the Secretary at MEITY would like to see collaboration between Indian and US researchers. And that is very critical for the future, because we are the 2 large democracies, and we have diversity in terms of geography, in terms of people, in terms of expertise, and so on. This is something and that is very, very critical, both for computing and engineering in the future. And if you look at these areas, these are all relevant to what we are doing in the 2 countries, and the collaboration between them. And this collaboration These collaborations are a good example. In the end, probably not now, but in a few years, they should be exemplars for the saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So when the US researchers and the Indian researchers get together, so what we can achieve together should be much greater than what you can do individually. Okay, so that should be the theme of the discussions and the proposals that as we go forward. And I would like to stop here, and I will be here today and tomorrow. I do not know if there is time for Q&A, but I'll be here if you have any questions. I'll be around. I'll be happy to answer those questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for this informative session. I think sir deserves a right round of applause for this wonderful session we had. So before we proceed for the tea break, ladies and gentlemen, as sir also mentioned, at 5:30 we will have breakout sessions, and it has 5 different rooms. Starts with semiconductor research, cybersecurity, next generation communication, green and sustainable technologies, and ITS. So 5:30 in the evening we will have the breakout session. Now we proceed for the tea break. This is like 30 minutes break, so please enjoy. And by 11:30 sharp, please be back. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a very humble request. Please take your seat. Well, I will request, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. Please put your phone on silent mode. We are about to proceed with the first session. The topic is semiconductor research. I request once again, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat. We are about to proceed with the first conference of this day. And it's a very humble request. Please put your phone on silent mode. The topic would be semiconductor research. And in next 2 minutes, we're going to proceed for the same. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I request you all, please take your seat. And I hope we all had a beautiful break. I hope you enjoyed. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology welcoming each one of you to MEITY NSF Research Collaboration Workshop 2023. Welcome back. So we're going to proceed with the first session. The topic would be semiconductor research. And we have 3 speakers, distinguished speakers for that. Please, you all have to help me in order to welcome them on stage. Please join your hands and help me to welcome Ms. Suchi Guha, University of Missouri, USA. The title will be of our presentation is Beyond Silicon Electronics, Novel Probes and Device Architects. Everybody, please help me to welcome Suchi Guha. Suchi Guha is a professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Missouri, Columbia, USA, where she joined as an assistant professor in 2003. She earned her doctorate degree in physics from Arizona State University, USA. Prior to that, she obtained master's and bachelor's degree in physics from the Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi, and the University of Delhi, respectively. Please join your hands and help me to welcome our first speaker of this conference, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Suchi Guha on stage. Now, may I request, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Professor Mukul Sarkar, IIT Delhi. That title would be High-End Imaging and Semiconductor Systems for Strategic and Automotive Sectors. Please help me to welcome Professor Mukul Sarkar, IIT Delhi. Mukul Sarkar received his MSc degree in Biomedical Engineering from University of Technology, Aachen, Germany in 2006 and PhD degree in Electronic Instrumentation Engineering from the Technical University of Delft, the Netherlands. In 2011, he was a full-time resident of IMEC from 2007 to 2011 during his PhD. After his PhD, he spent a year for postdoctoral researcher with Electronic Instrumentation Laboratory. Please help me to welcome on dais Professor Mukul Sarkar, IIT Delhi. So for the brief and also for the conclusion of this conference, we have a very right person present here, the veteran himself. Please help me to welcome C.V. Ramana, ladies and gentlemen. University of Texas, USA, please join your hands and help me to welcome him on stage. So C.V. Ramana, he is popularly known by this name to the community among his friends and colleagues, is a professor of aerospace and mechanical engineering in College of Engineering at the University of Texas at El Paso, USA. Dr. Ramana also serves as a faculty associate of interdisciplinary programs, namely the Energy Science and Engineering and Material Science and Engineering. Recently, the U.S. Department of Energy honored him with a joint appointment at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome these distinguished speakers on stage with some round of applause. Please sit now. Please take your seat. So we're going to start our first session, ladies and gentlemen, with our distinguished speakers. And the topic is semiconductor research. Before we proceed for the specific presentation, I request Mr. Ramana, sir, please come on the dais and please brief us about the both presentation. Please help me to welcome Mr. Ramana on dais, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone. It's my real pleasure to be here, and I always think about this MIGHTY NSF program is going to be very exciting and going to create more opportunities for joint collaboration and things like that. I won't take too much of your time, but I would like to mention a few things about semiconductors. I don't think that we can survive without semiconductors. Doesn't matter whether it is technology or simple electronics or think about even your phone. I always tease my students, this generation is like this. We used to like this, and this generation is all like this. Means you need a touch screen, you need a kind of finger mechanical pulse to move things and so forth. But how do you enable all these technologies if you don't have advanced semiconductors at your fingerprint? So semiconductors are required everywhere, automation and energy technologies, and you name it. Each and every place semiconductors are required, or simply advanced materials are required. And fortunately, we have excellent speakers today, Dr. Suchi Guha and also Dr. Mukul Sarkar. And I'm sure that they're going to enlighten us about their research and also where would the semiconductor research is going to go into the future and what kind of things that you can think of in terms of this NSF MIGHTY collaboration and proposals. So with that, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Suchi Guha, who is the professor in the University of Missouri. And she is going to tell us all about the electronics beyond the traditional silicon electronics.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Great. All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to thank the NSF and MIGHTY for this invitation. It's really a pleasure to be back in Delhi. I always enjoy being here. So this talk will focus on electronics, which is based on organic semiconductors. And before I get into the technical side, I'll just give you a very brief overview of our university and some of the unique facilities that we have in terms of semiconductor research. So what you see here is the administrative building of our university, and these are the iconic pillars. Let me see if this works better. Just a minute. Okay, yeah, these are the iconic pillars, and I will come back to it right at the end of the talk, okay? This is a four-campus, the University of Missouri has 4 campuses. We're the main campus. We're located right about in the middle of the country, and it was founded in 1839. This is part of the Louisiana Purchase Act. It's the oldest public university, which is west of the Mississippi River. Now, as many of you know probably, that every US university has a mascot, and that is very important for the sports team. Ours is the Royal Bengal Tiger. The city of Columbia is located about 100 miles west of St. Louis, which has got this beautiful arch. It's the gateway to the west. And here are some details about the number of students and the number of degree programs that we have. So the university has a very powerful research reactor, which is one of the highest power reactor at a US university. And in addition to medical isotope research, this is really good for neutron transmutation doping of semiconductors, which allows this very uniform doping in semiconductors. You can do radiation hardness studies, and there's a slew of neutron scattering studies programs for structure and dynamics of materials. A couple of years ago, this next-gen building, this was inaugurated, and part of this, we have a brand new electron microscopy center, which has got some really top-of-the-line scanning electron microscopes and transmission electron microscopes. And in particular, there is this STEM, which gives beautiful resolution down to the atomic level. And here are just some details about this scanning tunneling electron microscope. So silicon, of course, is ubiquitous, right? It's found in nature in terms of silicates. We have it all around us in terms, in your computers and photovoltaics. And since the invention of integrated circuits in the late 1950s, the size of the transistor, size of the silicon transistor has been rapidly, shrinking. And this, of course, goes at par with Moore's law, which was predicted in 1965. And the prediction was only for 10 years, but it's true even right up until now. And we're just about reaching a limit where, and as you all know, the law tells us it's the doubling of the transistors on a chip every 2 years. And we're just at a juncture where this is sort of, the scaling no longer works. If you look at your i7 core, it has about 1.9 billion transistors, which is this 22 nanometer technology. Next year, by 2025, it's supposed to be 2 nanometer. Mind you that these numbers are not really the size of the transistor, but it's the half pitch. So we're at a juncture where silicon transistors are really approaching their theoretical limit, and that has to do with the size of the gate, which is below 5 nanometer. You can't really control the flow of electrons in a silicon transistor. So we're really at a stage now where the distinction between a device and a material is sort of diminishing, and you're really entering the realm of molecular electronics. So with that, I come to the outline of the talk. I'll give you a very brief introduction to organic semiconductors and their application, move on to organic transistors, and again, talk about some differences between silicon transistors, touch upon some of the work that we have been doing using ferroelectric, using ferroelectric dielectrics. Move here. And the second part, I'll discuss a nonlinear optical imaging technique, which we have developed for visualizing transport in organic transistors. And if there is time, I'll just touch upon a new nanofabrication technology, which we are developing based on ice lithography. So conjugated polymers and molecules, which are based on carbon and hydrogen, they have this alternating, single double carbon bonds. These are semiconducting materials. The Nobel Prize was given more than 20 years ago in chemistry, for the development of these materials. And they come in all sizes and shapes. You can have long chain polymers, which, would dissolve in solvents, so they're solution processable. And in terms of displays, this is already a matured technology, right? You get OLED televisions, you can buy it everywhere. This has existed in the market for a few years. This year, Samsung has come up with this flexible displays. So this is, of course, one aspect of using these conjugated polymers and molecules in displays. But then there is this other extreme where you can use these small molecules to make small nanoscale devices. So for instance, an example would be in a single molecule, electronic switch. This was an example from several years ago where a phthalocyanine was used in a transistor, right, a single molecule. It's the same polymers and molecules which can be used in organic solar cells. They allow low-cost fabrication processes. They're lightweight, and you can also tune their chemical and physical properties. And since they're solution processable, that means you can now use printing technologies. You can use, inkjet printing or, roll-to-roll printing, especially for displays in solar cells. So just again to contrast, why organic semiconductors? Silicon has its limitations. It's an indirect bandgap semiconductor, which means there is really no tunability that you have. It requires high temperature processing, and there is really no further room for miniaturization. With these pi-conjugated, polymers and molecules, there is much more engineering functionality. These are solution processable, and you can also control the morphology quite a bit. So in terms of where the impact of flexible electronics, I just wanted to show this, that in the Asia-Pacific market, for instance, this is already a $25 billion market. If you look at globally, the prediction is supposed to be by 2032, it's supposed to reach about $70 billion. And we in academics also gauge, success with the number of publications, which has also been rapidly going up. So here I just sort of summarize, the various applications of these organic semiconductors. I've already touched upon displays. You can have printed batteries, wireless communication, and then again in energy harvesting materials, there are photovoltaics, thermoelectric generators. They can be used as sensors for neuromorphic computing, biosensing, and so on. I kind of like this slide. This is from this innovation lab, which is really in Germany. It's a consortium between academics and industry. And for all this to happen, what you really need in this area is good chemical synthesis. We need good analytical tools. You need device physics. And if you're going into large-scale electronics, you need good printing capabilities. And the other extreme, if you're looking into nanoscale devices, you need good nanofabrication techniques. So with all, the sort of the building block of all these applications that I'm showing is your organic transistors. And I know there are many experts in this audience, but I'll just go over some basics here. In these organic field effect transistors, so what you have is a dielectric layer, the organic semiconductor layer, it's a 3-terminal device, source, drain, gate. And when you bias it, so I should point out that most of these organic transistors, they work better as p-type. And so here the source is grounded, you have, you're biasing the gate. And now when you apply the drain source voltage, right? And now let's keep that fixed. So if we if we sweep the gate source voltage, you can get the drain source current, so you have an off state and an on state. And turns out that there are several parameters, which impact the transistor performance. One is the actual, the morphology of the semiconducting layer, and I'm talking about all organic materials here. The dielectric and the semiconductor interface, that plays a huge role, and then the metal semiconductor interface as well. And there are, different geometries. You can have transistors where the source drain electrodes are at the bottom. You can have, again, bottom gate, bottom contact. And again, I'm not going into any details, but each of these has its own, advantages and disadvantages. So if you try and compare, these two worlds, right, the silicon world, which is my MOSFET, metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistors, versus the organics, there are several differences. And the MOSFETs, they work in the inversion regime. That means it's the minority carriers here. The organic transistors, they work in the accumulation regime. What is very different in the two systems is the mechanism of transport. So what I'm showing on the right here is the carrier mobility for a silicon transistor, which decreases as you increase the temperature, whereas in an organic transistor, the carrier mobility increases, which automatically tells us that here it's more like a hopping, it's an activated transport, and that happens because you have disorder. That, of course, limits the mobility. So in silicon, where the mobility, actually the electronic mobility can be over 500 centimeters square per volt second, in the organic world, it's if you reach a number of 1, that's a good number. So, which is already telling us if you want fast electronics, probably organic transistors is not the way. And because if you look at the transit frequency, that's directly proportional to the carrier mobility. However, for many other applications, for instance, in your OLED televisions, the back panel, the way you're lighting these pixels, you can easily do that with organic transistors because you don't need this fast switching there. So now let's just get into some of the more details. How do we choose the semiconductor, right? So again, we need to choose the semiconducting layer and the dielectric layer. And you have, a wide range of polymers and small molecules to choose from. The polymers, whenever we talk about, say polymers, they're usually solution processable, so you can print them. And small molecules, you would typically have to evaporate it. Now, turns out that the packing, motif makes a huge difference. So, for instance, if these molecules pack in slip stacked or the slipped pi stack, what happens is that the overlap, you have only one overlap integral, which is shown by this J. And in that case, you get an isotropic transport, which reduces the carrier mobility. If you have a packing motif where you have more than one of these integrals, like for instance in this brick wall and the herringbone, then you get isotropic transport, which again improves the carrier mobilities and the overall performance of the transistors. Now, chemists can do wonders in this field. For instance, often what we use are donor-acceptor systems. In one monomer, you have an acceptor unit and a donor unit, and with which you can really tune the gap, and that's what this is showing here. And these kind of materials, they, the band gap is close to in the near-infrared region. So it's not just good for transistors, you can use them in photodiodes, and we've demonstrated their application in zinc oxide-based photodiodes. So what you see here are the two red curves, which is the responsivity, and this is just some more details with, by improving the performance actually of the zinc oxide, we could improve the responsivity as well. Now, in terms of, again, the semiconducting layer, what happens with these organic molecules and polymers is they can be structural variations. And I like to show this because here what we were doing is looking at this particular molecule, which has these long side chains. So you could either evaporate and form a thin film, or you can make a solution and then form a film. And we use this in this transistor architecture. And depending on the processing condition, we could either get carrier mobilities of the order of 0.1, or we would get something like of the order of 10 to the power -5. So huge variation. And I like to show this because this was sort of a truly, international collaboration that we had, where the synthesis was done at IISc Bangalore. We had an expert in synchrotron-based XRD at the Danish Technology University, and my group doing the devices, and the measurements were done in Grenoble. It took us a while, but what we figured out was that there are sort of two polymorphs, there are two phases, and the second phase that you see here, that's DR2, which deviates from the coplanarity. So again, depending on these processing conditions, you can have different polymorphism, and that was the reason for getting these low values of mobility, because there was a higher fraction of this phase. Okay, so we sort of know how to choose the semiconducting layer. How do we choose the dielectric layer? These transistors work in the accumulation regime. That means you need, for low operating voltages, you need high accumulation of charges. High accumulation of charges would mean that you need high value of capacitance. High capacitance means high dielectric constant, right? Now, of course, when we think about high dielectric constant materials, in the inorganic world, there are plenty. All these oxides are extreme, you can get up to 40 for the dielectric constant. However, so many of them are not solution processable, these oxides. And then the interface between an oxide and a polymer at times has many issues. Now, if you look at the polymer world, there are many polymer dielectrics as well, things like plexiglass, which is your PMMA. The one problem is the dielectric constant is small, so to have a higher capacitance, you have to make, them quite thin. And that has issues as well, because then you can get pinhole effects and so on. It turns out that ferroelectric dielectrics have a higher dielectric constant, and I write it as varies because, the dielectric constant changes with temperature as well. So in terms of a polymer ferroelectric, PVDF, which is this polyvinylidene fluoride, has existed for over 50 years, and it has, again, it's a carbon-hydrogen-based system. It has, and it has these fluorine atoms. Let me see if I can. There we go. It has these fluorine atoms, and this is the beta phase, which is the ferroelectric phase. Turns out if you use some kind of a copolymer, you always, when you cast a film, you always get the ferroelectric phase. So these polymer ferroelectrics, of course, can be used in, two-terminal devices like a capacitor, and you get this kind of a polarization versus applied voltage, you get this hysteresis. You also get this kind of a hysteresis in a transistor. So these, for instance, would have applications in memory devices. Now, in terms of, so our application here is really trying to use that high K dielectric and get low operating voltage transistors. Now, this is an interesting point that, so what I'm showing you here is that in a transistor, when I keep the organic semiconducting layer the same, but I'm changing this dielectric, and I have different dielectric constants. So what you see is that the carrier mobility decreases as you increase the dielectric constants. It's the same semiconducting layer. This happens in silicon transistors as well. When you use hafnium oxide, the mobility decreases, and that has to do with these Froelich polarons. It's also called remote scattering, remote phonon scattering. So the issue here is, on the one hand, you are benefiting from low operating voltage because of the high K material, but then you get low carrier mobilities. So we've done some work with these kind of polymer ferroelectrics where we judiciously, change the polarization. So what we've been able to do is electrically pole the dielectric layer before fabricating the device. And what we find is that, with that, we can enhance the carrier mobilities, for instance. So this is just to give you an example that we were using this particular molecule for, as a semiconducting layer. And the ferroelectric, it was, in one case, it was vertically poled. So before we fabricated it, you just electrically pole it. Another case, we came up with this architecture. We were what we call texture polling, where the bottom part was, laterally poled, and then the top was electrically poled. And if you look at the performance of the transistor, for the vertically poled, you see that the carrier mobility is about 0.08, but when we use this texture polling, that goes up to 1. So again, just by changing the polarization within the dielectric layer, you can improve the properties of the transistor. Very recently, using differential phase contrast scanning transmission electron microscope, this is just very recent results, we've been able to image these domains, and I think this is the first time we've actually seen it in a polymer. This is an example of the unpoled and the vertically poled. It's not the textured poled, but you see that significantly more uniform polarization when you pole the dielectric. And I should point out, even when it's unpoled, it's still ferroelectric. The last thing I wanted to mention here is, these multi-conductant states are really good. I mean, they're actually a prerequisite for brain-inspired neuromorphic devices. So you can do this with a two-terminal device, like a capacitor, but turns out that the power consumption can be quite high. So in that sense, a three-terminal transistor device is actually better. And this is an example where you see these, these are the 4 of our devices, and we had these lateral electrodes at the bottom of the whole substrate, and just by applying, different fields, we could get different output characteristics for the same transistor. So this is a project that we're just starting out in neuromorphic devices, where again, in a transistor, what happens is the gate acts as the presynaptic and the source drain current is your postsynaptic, and you can do both photonic as well as electronic synapses. So this is something we started a month ago. Okay, so what I'll do next is move on to the second part, which is where we've used, and my background was actually in optics, and I love to work with all kinds of optical spectroscopy, linear as well as nonlinear. So right before COVID, we got this new ultra-fast laser system. So we set this up, and what we are using it is now for nonlinear optical imaging to visualize transport in these organic transistors. So the method that it works on is second harmonic generation. So this is exactly not this one, but your typical green laser pointers, they work on that principle, where you have a frequency doubling, right? So the crystal, it's a nonlinear crystal, where if you come in with omega, it converts into 2 omega. So that's basically the principle behind this imaging technique that I will show. So just to sort of go back to the different interfaces, one issue is that achieving ohmic contact, that is the metal, now we're talking about the metal semiconductor interface, achieving purely ohmic contact can be quite difficult. And then you have all these mid-gap states, for instance. So in these organic transistors, the contact resistances can be quite high. So the question we wanted to ask is that is there an alternate way to visualize transport, which is where the contact resistance and the trap states are not playing a role. And this is where this whole concept of the second harmonic generation comes in. So I should also point out that any material that shows second harmonic generation has to have certain symmetry. So actually the center, it should be non-centrosymmetric. And so here is an example where if you have these chromophores which are randomly oriented, this is isotropic. But now if I apply an electric field, I orient the dipoles, that means I'm breaking that symmetry, and now the material can become, you can have second harmonic generation from systems like this. So these are just some details. When you have this electric field-induced second harmonic generation, it's really the Chi3 which comes into play. We won't go into all the details. In a transistor, when you're applying an electric field, you're inherently breaking the symmetry. So what that means is if I come in with a laser frequency of omega, I should get 2 omega out of it. So we utilize this method, and what we have now developed is a time-resolved EFISH technique for visualizing the transport. So we come in with this pulse laser, and we synchronize it, with the electric pulse that we apply on the device. And for instance, here, when tau is equal to, when t is equal to this, whatever the time interval is, then the carriers are injected and they distribute across the channel. So here it's just some more details about the actual setup. We can skip it. Let me come to the results. So this is now from a pentacene-based field effect transistor. And what we're doing is we're coming in with a pulsed laser of 1120 nanometers. So the second harmonically generated would be at 560. And what you're seeing here are images of the source drain and at different time intervals. And you find that there is this polarization cloud that starts at the source. And as you increase tau, that polarization cloud sort of goes from the source to the drain. So this is the induced polarization, which is nothing but, you are actually observing the charges which are moving from the source to the drain. And if you look at the plot profile, you see how you can visualize this motion of the charges. There are some other subtleties. For instance, you see that the intensity is decreasing, and that has to do with you're setting up a space charge field, and that sort of negates, the applied electric field. But anyway, from these curves, what we can now do is, let's go here. So we can measure where that polarization cloud is and plot it against, the delay. And from here, using this Maxwell-Wagner model, we can get the mobility, right? And this is what we find for this pentacene device, which is 0.16 centimeters square per volt second. Now, for the same device, when we do an electrical measurements, which is the normal way of doing things, we get a mobility which is much lower. And this can be done for any material. This is for an N-type N-type field effect transistor. And all I wanted to point out is that here you see the polarization cloud actually goes from the source, from the drain to the source. So this table sort of summarizes, the different semiconductors we have used, the different the dielectrics that we have used. I don't know where I should. The different dielectrics that we have used, and in each case, the mobility that you obtain using this E-fish technique is actually much larger than the electrical measurements. So, and there is also a correlation that you see this, the largest discrepancy is when the contact resistance is the largest. So this has given us some insight, and now we know that obviously we can improve on that metal semiconductor interface. So this is some ongoing work in my group where, with these kind of bottom contact transistors, we've started putting this very thin aluminum oxide layer with which you can see now the mobility goes up to 0.7, which is what we get with E-fish. So it's just a way to come up, not only just to visualize, but it helps us to improve the performance of these transistors. Now, the last thing I wanted to say here is, of course, what I've shown you is a single transistor. These are building blocks. You can make, very simple voltage complementary voltage inverter circuits by combining an N-type and a P-type. These are all based on organic semiconductors, which give appreciable gain. Then you can connect, several of these inverter circuits, make these ring oscillator circuits. And I'm showing you a result from the group of Hagen Klauk in Stuttgart, where they've achieved one of the, this is a couple of years ago, again, in this field, this is a very high frequency, which is 21 megahertz. And they could do this by not just the, choosing the right semiconductor, but also by changing the channel length, making it quite small. Other applications of transistors, there's a huge amount of work that's happening in biosensing, and my group has been doing some of it as well, where again, with the same transistor geometry, you have, a metal, a sensing area. So we were using some peptides and used them as glucose sensors. I'll not discuss that. But what I want to do at this stage is just come back to this architecture, and what turns out is that, the channel length, if you can make it smaller, you can really improve the frequency. How much time do I have? 3-4 minutes? Okay, then I can just touch upon this. So this brings me to the last part, which is, can you do ice sculpting at molecular length scales, right? And why do we need it? So again, coming back to this question of the frequency, remember the frequency depends not just on the mobility, which we really don't have that much of a control because that's coming from the semiconducting layer itself, but it's inversely proportional to the channel length. So one way is to decrease the channel length. Now for these top source drain contacts, how do you do that? You can, shadow mask is not going to work to have channel lengths which is less than 5 micron, for instance. Traditional lithography, like your photolithography or electron beam lithography, where you use these kind of, resist, you have to develop it. These don't work for delicate and complex, freestanding 3 surfaces. So this is where ice lithography comes in. And here what you do is you cool a substrate, and then you come in with your ice resist. This ice resist, so you're coming in with a gas species. It can be water ice, it can be alcohol ice, and this is all done in a SEM chamber. And then you come in with your electron beam and, make a pattern. If you're using water ice, then it's a positive resist. And then the next thing would be that you metallize it, so you deposit whichever metal you want, and then you just have to warm it up and you get this pattern. Now, the advantage here is that the ultimate resolution is really set by the resist molecule that you're using. And if you're using water, that's 0.3 nanometer compared to something which is over 5 nanometer for PMMA, which is your traditional, photoresist. So not only does it give you, sub-nanometer scale control, it's also environmentally friendly. So just to go over the process, what you would do is, and so this is again done in a SEM chamber. You cool the substrate, you deposit the ice, you come in with the E-beam, and so the nice thing is that, you can do in situ inspection, because if there's any problem, you can go back to this stage, deposit the ice again, do your E-beam patterning, and then you would sputter, for instance, any metal, and then you warm it up, and then you're left with, the patterning. So this was a technique which was actually developed by my colleague, Professor Gavin King, when he was a graduate student. And very recently, he's managed to get that whole system from Harvard. So they donated it to us, and it's now all operational. So you see that it's an SEM channel, which has got this sputtering system attached to it, and there's a load lock, so you can move your sample between the two stages. This is all liquid nitrogen cooled. And the first pattern, this was achieved, I think, just a month ago, is this. This was our logo. I told you I will come back to the pillars. I don't know if you can see this, but those are the pillars that we have outside our administrative building. So this was the logo that we came up with. This is on silicon. I should point out that, this kind of ice lithography is really done in 2 other places, one in Denmark and one in China, and we're just setting our system up. So you see work from other groups. They've been able to pattern some really small metal contacts on silicon nitride films and other, delicate surfaces. So this is really something which would be used, again, not just for transistors, but you can use it for biological systems, and it has several other applications. So with that, I would like to summarize, and here is sort of just an outlook, that the future of organic electronics is extremely bright. It will not replace silicon-based electronics, but rather it complements. And what I've tried to show you here is that it spans all the way from large printed electronics, which is a technology that is already in the market, to molecular nanoelectronics, which I really haven't talked about, but there is a lot of scope here in terms of quantum computing, in spintronics. And I just wanted to point out with these large electronics, printed electronics, there's a consortium now of American universities and a company which is this NextFlex. And they've come up with this nice design where they show which of these components can be printed or which may not be printed. So with that, I would just like to acknowledge various people, all my students over the years who have developed some of these techniques, my faculty colleagues in the University of Missouri, and again, all my collaborators across the globe. And thank you all so much for your attention.
What we'll do is, let's continue with the second speaker.
Yep.
And then we'll...
Yep.
That's very fascinating. Thank you so much, Dr. Guha. Really, it's a very wonderful talk. And we hope that the organic electronics, although Dr. Guha mentioned that it's going to be complement, not replacing silicon, but at some point, we need to look for alternatives for silicon-based electronics. And we can't survive with silicon electronics for too long. And if we want to see, if we really want to see the pushing boundaries of the electronics and the nano design, for sure, we need to look for alternatives. Perhaps there may be other things such as organic electronics and so on. However, we'll continue the discussion at the last 10-15 minutes. But now let's move on to the second speaker, Dr. Please. And then Dr. Sarkar is going to talk about the semiconductors for automotive sector, and he is going to enlighten us what's going on in his lab. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I have titled my talk as High-End Imaging and Semiconductor Systems for Strategic and Automotive Sectors. If I can have a mic. Move around. I'm sorry, I'd like to move around. Right. When we hear about automotive systems, 2 buzzwords come to our mind. electric vehicle and autonomous systems. Electric vehicle is gallium nitride. Don't want to go into that zone. Want to stick to silicon. So autonomous driving comes to mind. But how do you do autonomous driving on an Indian road? If you have seen the chaos of an Indian road, autonomous driving is not a challenge, it's a super challenge. If you have two cameras in a car, probably if you want to do an autonomous driving in India, you need 20 of them, right? So there's a huge market for camera sensors into automotive if you want to do autonomous driving in India. If you see the picture carefully, the conventional ideology that there are only few blind spots which are not covered by your rear mirror is not true anymore, because there are infinitely large number of blind spots that you have while you're driving on an Indian road. So what do you need? You need cameras everywhere. You need cameras to do a 360-degree panoramic view, so you are kind of checking who is crossing from your left, who is crossing from your right, and who is kind of doing a zigzag motion in front or behind you. You need a night vision video or processing logic, because something in the night might similarly immediately come before your car and you don't have the time to press the brake. Right? There are a lot of challenges, but this also helps us to kind of innovate. In automotive applications, the imaging sensors, and I'll come to what exactly imaging sensors mean. They are the kind of heart of your camera systems, right? Must operate in adverse weather conditions. If you're a resident of Delhi, you will be able to appreciate this. From all the way to 50, it goes to 0 degree, right? So should it operate for a wide temperature ranges. It should operate in extreme illumination conditions, must have a very large field of view, and must exhibit a very high dynamic range. Now, if you don't follow the terminologies, bear with me. I'll explain these terminologies. But today's automotive, in fact, the UN General Assembly declared the last decade, 2010 to 2020, as the decade of actions for automotive safety. And in the last decade, what we saw was that the number of sensors in an automotive drastically increased. You have now short-range radar, long-range radar to do your collision detections. You have your ultrasound detectors to assist your rear-view parking. You have your night vision cameras. You have your 3D cameras. You have driver monitoring. You have inside cabin monitoring and whatnot. This is the set of imaging sensors that I was talking about. This is the kind of imaging sensors that have gone into a car from pretty much 0 in 2010 to almost 4 or 5 now in 2020. And we believe that this will cross almost 20 sensors by 2030. In fact, in many countries, it has now become a legal law to include as many cameras as possible for security purposes. Where's the market for cameras? I mean, what is the market? I mean, what is the market share for these cameras? Pretty much economics determine the research, and you have to see if there's no market, probably the research will not have that impact. But if there's a market for it, then the research will be very beneficial. And you see that the imaging market is kind of pretty much dominated by your smartphones. In fact, smartphone now these days have 4 cameras, right? Automotive market is pretty small. It's only 14% of total market. And in the next decade, what we see is that from $47 billion, it's going all the way up to around $143 billion. That's a CAGR of almost 20%. That's a huge market. The past performance does not predict the future, but if you look at the past performance of the cameras that has gone into automotive, 20% CAGR is a solid return, right? It is something that you want to be in. Some of the major automotive players around semiconductor, which holds around 60% of the automotive camera in driving systems, Omnivision, Panasonic, and Pixel Plus. So this is just to give you a glimpse that there are quite a lot of companies very, very active in designing CMOS image sensors. But let's go into what or where the semiconductor comes in. If you see a signal flow in automotive, especially the vision sensor, you have a camera module and you have an electronic control unit which receives information from multiple camera units, processes it, and takes a decision. So what are the units of this camera module? You have a lens, which is an optical component. You have a sensor, which is either CCD or CMOS. CCD stands for charge coupled devices. CMOS stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor, and we'll discuss that in bit detail. You have an image coprocessor, because it's kind of a resolution. A 1 megapixel sensor, nothing but 1024 cross 1024. So you get a lot of information that needs to be processed for displaying. So you need an image coprocessor. You have to send that information to an electronic control unit. So you need a serializer and an LVDS and Ethernet. And on the other side at ECU, you need a deserializer and an application processor to actually make sense of the data. All these components that I'm talking about, other than the lens, which is an optical component, the sensor, image coprocessor, serializer, deserializer, and application processor, SoC, are all silicon-based. This is all semiconductors. It doesn't talk about the external peripheral circuits or peripheral devices that are required. It talks only about the core components, but you see that in one unit, the number of semiconductor elements that are required are substantially larger. What does a camera system consist of? It's a kind of a zoomed version, and it is the most critical element of a camera system is your image sensor. It's most critical because it is the device which is converting the photons into electrons. And once you have electrons, you have current, and you are very comfortable with our Kirchhoff's voltage law and Kirchhoff's current law. So we know what to do with it. So this sensor is actually enabling us to use all our basic circuit theory and network theory because it converts the photon into electrons. The optics primarily focuses the photons onto the detector, which is the image sensor. Now you have an electron generated per photon. It produces a current. You know what to deal or how to deal with that current, but you also wanted to see an image. The system electronics converts that current into a voltage, digitizes it, and displays it for you to see as an image. You get an image, but you also want to take some decisions. For example, whether you're going to hit a car or not, whether a collision is going to happen or not, whether the driver is sleeping or not. Processing algorithms comes into picture, which takes the image, processes it, and gives you a kind of a decision. All these elements must be packaged in a custom design, because in automotives, the temperatures can go all the way from -70 to plus 180 degrees. So you need a very specific packaging for reliability purposes. What we do at IIT Delhi and also Third Eye Tech, which is the startup company that I founded 5 years back, is all of these. Our primary focus is the image sensor. We are primarily circuit designers by profession. So we design the image sensors, but we have a team to do custom optics, system electronics, processing algorithms, as well as custom camera development. Just to dive a little bit into how do you make the sensors, how do the sensors work? There are primarily two variants of imaging sensors, CCDs, charge coupled devices. You don't see them anymore. They were pretty dominant till around 2010. The CMOS has taken over. Pretty much 95% of your camera chips are all CMOS. But CCDs had a very nice feature. CCDs use MOS capacitors as detecting element, and they pretty much operated in charge domain. So it worked like kind of a bucket of charges transferring from one row to another. Because it was operating in charge domain, it was pretty much noiseless. So the signal to noise ratio that you could get in a CCD was substantially large. Whereas in the CMOS, if you see, you have the processing electronics inside the pixel. The charge to voltage conversion happens in the pixel. And whenever charge to voltage conversion happens, you need a buffer, and that buffer introduces this noise. And therefore, CMOS sensors were very noisy. In fact, till even today, for space application, you will see pretty much CCDs being used, but for all other applications, CMOS have kind of graduated in performance drastically over the last 2 decades. We now have noise performance comparable to CCDs. What is the advantage of CMOS over CCDs is that in CCDs, to have a processing logic, you need another substrate, another wafer. So you need 2 wafers, one for a detection logic, another for processing logic. That increases your cost. While the CMOS, you can have the detection as well as processing on the same substrate. And that pretty much means that it's much cheaper. And also to transfer charges, you need substantially large voltages because you need to create a very large electric field. Large electric field means high power consumption because you have to use very large voltages, whereas CMOS are now pretty much working at 1.8 volts. So the effective power consumption of these devices are substantially low compared to CCD. So the swap requirement, the size, weight, and performance of CMOS have now kind of overtaken CCDs, and therefore CCDs are the ones that you're going to see more often. If you see, primary difference between a CCD and a CMOS is the optical component is similar. The CCDs have a color filter and a pixel array, and the rest of the logic in a separate substrate, whereas CMOS has everything on the same substrate. I said we need a very high dynamic range because you want to see in very low light as well as you want to see in very high light. Low light because you would have a good night performance. High light because I don't know whether you have experience of driving on Indian roads, the beam light is almost 4 times than accepted limit, right? So if you want to see in that high beam light, your sensors should also have a very, very high dynamic range. It should be able to see very high lighting conditions. Dynamic range is simply the ratio of maximum signal that you can detect to minimum signal that you can detect. So the maximum illumination to minimum illumination is what is dynamic range. So if you want to operate in Indian roads, you need sensors with very, very high dynamic range. How do you compare? If you see an eye has a dynamic range of around 180 dB, whereas a conventional photographic camera that you see in the market has a dynamic range of around 70 dB. What do you want? 180 dB is substantially large dynamic range. It's kind of impossible to have the dynamic range in silicon, but you want to have somewhere in between. Why is dynamic range so very critical? If you see the first image, it's a high dynamic range scene. You see a man standing in the dark portion of the image, and you also see a saturation on the chair. If your camera has to detect both the person in the dark as well as the saturation in the chair, then it must be set to proper exposure. If you don't set, if you do a short exposure, you miss the man in the dark. If you do a long exposure, you miss the information on the chair. So you need to have a kind of a proper exposure, an effective dynamic range to be able to see this entire scene or the entire objects in one high illuminated scene. Highlight is what we understand. Why do you also want to do low light? If you see a normal conventional sensor is very bad in low light imaging, primarily because the noise dominates and also the sensitivity of a PN junction is not that large. For very low light, people usually prefer infrared cameras, but infrared cameras you can detect, but you can't identify. So you want something in between which can not only detect but also identify. And if your conventional CMOS image sensors can do that, then that's really wonderful. I'll skip this. In order to increase the dynamic range, you have to understand what dynamic range is properly. So dynamic range, in that graph, the x-axis is the number of photons being incident, y-axis is the output generated. The minimum signal that can be detected is the noise floor of the electronics, the pixel as well as the column electronics. And the highest signal that can detect is the saturation of the photodiode. Your photodiode is pretty much have a depletion capacitance, and the size of the depletion capacitance determines how many photons you can integrate. And the dynamic range is the ratio of saturation to noise. Pardon me for using a beer glass because I can't find anything else which explains image sensors better than a beer glass. A photodiode has its depletion capacitance, which is represented by the size of a beer glass. But if you have ever tried to fill the beer, you can never fill the glass to the brim. You will always have that froth. When you try to fill the depletion capacitance, you will never be able to fill the depletion capacitance to your brim, because the moment it reaches to a certain level, the electrons, because of its Brownian motion, will start jumping all over. So you will not be able to fill the photodiode completely. So you will never be able to reach the full well capacity of the photodiode. So you'll always be limited by the saturation capacity. The froth also tells us that every time you try to fill the glass, the size or the depth of the froth will not be the same. It will vary. That represents the photon shot noise of the light. When the light is incident, light is governed by the photon shot noise. So whenever you try to capture the number of photons in a given time frame, it'll always be different because of the shot noise. The same thing happens when you try to empty the glass. There will always be a drop of beer left in the glass. Even you keep tilting it, it will still be there. That represents the dark noise or the dark current in the photodiode. You can try to transfer all the information from the photodiode, but there will always be 1 or 2 electrons left in the photodiode that will come in the next frame and kind of disturb your imaging. That's the dark noise. So effectively, the dynamic range is the ratio between the saturation capacity and the dark noise, or in other words, the beer that you get to drink. So there are 2 strategies to actually increase the dynamic range. Either you increase the size of the glass, the saturation capacity, or you decrease the noise flow. And there's quite a volume of literature in increasing the saturation. We have well capacity. So the photodiode well capacity is adjusted. The well capacity depends upon the reverse bias voltage. So you keep changing the reverse bias voltage to change the well capacity. You have multiple capture. You capture the image multiple times and have a storage element somewhere. And then you combine these samples to have a higher dynamic range. You can use a logarithmic pixel, because logarithmic pixel compresses the information on the higher side. But logarithmic pixels can't be reset, so they have its own noise. You can use lateral overflow capacitors. Lateral overflow capacitors are kind of an additional capacitor besides your photodiode capacitor, which aids in increasing the effective signal that's captured. And you also have kind of saturation detection pixels. So every time the photodiode gets filled, it resets and you kind of capture that the photodiode was reset. The number of times the photodiode is reset is added to the information when you read it out. That actually increases the saturation capacity as well. We do pretty much all of this, but we are not very active in the saturation side, because the saturation side, there's quite a volume of work that has already happened. We are very active on the noise flow side, because here the amount of work that is available in the literature is not very high. You can increase or decrease the noise flow by using high column gain amplifiers. So if you understand the concept of input referred noise, you measure the output noise, and if your column gain is very, very high, then you refer it back to the input, because your gain amplifier, your gain is very, very high, the input referred noise goes down. So many of the commercial sensors use high gain amplifiers to kind of reduce the noise flow, but I believe that it's kind of an artificial reduction, because the sensing node at the photodiode node, the noise does not reduce because of use of high column gain amplifiers. You can do signal multiplication. That's what was done in EMCCDs, electron multiplication CCDs. It is more like you keep juggling between 2 different electric fields, and you create an avalanche of electrons, and avalanche is gain of electrons. So you generate, let's say, one photon generates one electron hole pair, and that you use that electron hole pair to create an avalanche of higher number of electrons. That is primarily the signal amplification. Or you also do something called as conversion gain enhancement. Conversion gain tells us the amount of voltage generated per electron detected. And common sense tells us if the conversion gain is very, very high, then your processing logic can easily detect it and work with it. Conversion gain enhancement depends upon your floating diode capacitance or the photodiode capacitance. Lower is the photodiode capacitance, higher is the conversion gain. And now you can see the problem, because for saturation you need larger photodiode, but if you use larger photodiode, conversion gain goes down, right? So we have quite a lot of work on conversion gain enhancement. In fact, we have managed to get conversion gains of over 500 microvolts per electron, where the state of the art is somewhere around 100, 200 microvolts per electron. What are the areas of development in automotive sensors that we are currently active? High dynamic range. I talked about the low light part, but we're also doing a lot of pixel architectures to increase the dynamic range on the higher side. You also need these sensors to operate at a very, very high speed. The conventional cameras work at 30 frames per second, but 30 frames per second will not be able to capture high moving targets on the road. So you need sensors which can work at over 200, 300 frames per second. You need compression. If you see automotive cameras, they are low resolution, 1 to 3 mega, but because the amount of processing that needs to be done has to be low in order to take a decision quickly. But as time passes, you will see higher resolution sensors kicking in the automotives too. And if you use higher resolution sensors, that primarily means it generates quite a volume of data. And that volume of data has to be processed or transmitted. So you will need compression. You need lossless compression to work with such high data. Time of flight is kind of a novel concept. LiDAR is a primary example of time of flight, but we do time of flight using CMOS sensors. In time of flight, you emit a pulsed laser, it travels, hits the object and comes back. You know the speed of the light, you know when you pulsed it and when you received it. Based on this information, you can actually calculate the depth of the object. We use conventional CMOS image sensors to do time of flight applications. And mostly in automotive sensors, I told you that you need to negate for that high beam of light. So you also work on background light subtraction in pixels. So most of this that I'm talking about are all in the pixel and in the analog domain, right? So we have already demonstrated rejection of up to around 125 kilolux of background light. 125 kilolux is a substantial amount of light. And we are now slowly moving into SWIR. SWIR stands for shortwave infrared. Shortwave infrared because you also want to see through fog and rain drops. Conventional sensors don't work. So you have to go for higher wavelengths from around 1.4 to 2.2 micron. Your visible sensors will not be able to detect those wavelengths. So you will need SWIR sensors. And also SPADs, single photon avalanche diodes. These are sensors which are biased in breakdown mode, so that even when a single photon impinges on it, it generates a very large current. So the time resolution of the sensors is very, very high. You're able to detect light pretty quickly in the scene, and therefore you will be able to also process information pretty quickly in the scene. So we work pretty much in all domains of image sensors, in automotive, as well as strategic applications. This is a flow diagram for an ADAS. What I talked about was the first channel, the imaging. You have environmental mapping, decision, engine, and control. And all of this has potentials for custom silicon development, which works with your imager for better performance. I think I'll end this. This quote, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we are in the business of capturing pictures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar. It's a wonderful talk. And now my job is to make sure that so far it's going like a lecture mode. I'm going to change the mode for the last 10 minutes of this particular session. I'm going to go around and facilitate the discussion. Let me start with Dr. Guha. Dr. Guha, this was fantastic. I'm going to shoot you a critical question. Yes. What do you think about the organic electronics going into the future?
As I said, the future is very bright. At least in terms of displays, the technology is there, the market is there, And for many applications, you really don't need fast electronics. So one example is in the television screens, the pixels are being operated, because the back panel is all with transistors. And for that, you don't need very high switching speeds. So it's a perfect, application there. The nice thing about these things is, again, the low cost and the tunability. So again, as I mentioned, it's not going to replace silicon, but it complements, and you have, newer and other applications in sensing, perhaps even in, especially since you were talking about near infrared, some of these materials can actually work very well as photodiodes, even at room temperature, which is always a problem with silicon-based.
Yeah, in fact, lead sulfide-based quantum dots are already used in soil sensors.
Except those still have to be cooled, right? So there are actually now new examples where you can do at room temperature as well. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's perfect answer. Actually, thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Dr. Sarkar, and to the audience and the community, we need to look at the things as a community, right? Scientific community. And not necessarily these two are the topics. I just want to mention that. These are the token examples of the challenging problems. And they are experts in the field, and that's why they're chosen to give an overview of what's going on in terms of organic electronics and also sensor systems for automotive industry, and et cetera, et cetera. But there are other things also that we need to focus into. For instance, I'm not speaking on behalf of any agency or anything like that, but with the permission from Dr. Mohan Kumar, I would like to mention a couple of things here related to semiconductor research. May I, sir? Well, US just announced a big hub for semiconductor research, microelectronics development, and so on. And these two big grants are from Department of Defense, okay? So, and in addition to that, National Science Foundation joined the companies such as Intel, IBM, and so on. And now they have a section called Future of Semiconductors. The Future of Semiconductors from National Science Foundation, their job is to invite, already it was very clear from the Secretary of MEITY this morning, his son was so impressive because getting a grant from NSF is something that he can be proud of, and you can clearly say that there is some scientific excitement there. So anyway, I'm not deviating the topic, but the Future of Semiconductors is a big program. And now they announced a few grants, again, like their big centers and so on. And if you wish, again, I'm not speaking on behalf of any agency or something, but like I'm speaking as a semiconductor expert. Go to the NSF website and look at the program, which they funded a wide variety of projects, and those are all contemporary, they're all of interest, and they are emerging. And as a scientific community, we need to look into all these challenging problems and find solutions. That's exactly the goal and the motivation of this joint research collaborative platform, as mentioned by Dr. Mohan Kumar and also Dr. Sunita Verma this morning. So, unfortunately, it's absolutely impossible for three of us to make sure that we cover each and every topic. No way. For instance, I can speak on behalf of oxide dielectrics person. We all thought hafnium oxide. Hafnium is being explored for many, many, many years. Even we say about the crystal structures of hafnium oxide in basic solid state physics courses or material science courses. But have we ever thought of that there is going to be ferroelectricity in hafnium oxide? It was discovered. And similarly, I am going to pose one more. Quantum dots. The recent Nobel Prize in Chemistry, they gave the Nobel Prize for the discovery of quantum dots, but when it comes to application potential, as Dr. Sunita Verma mentioned this morning, where we are, we need to look at these kind of things as a community and develop strategies so that, who knows, quantum dots could be something solving your automotive problem. Or let's put together a scenario that in the automotive sector, there are so many sensors there and so on, and this is all making our life more comfortable and making sure that as a material scientist or semiconductor scientist or engineer, that we want to serve the society, right? So let's say I will pose another question like, is it possible to have a car that is going on road, all of a sudden picks up the momentum, get into the air, and jump onto somewhere else? Because Dr. Sarkar clearly showed sometimes it's extremely difficult to move on the roads. Population is growing. How can we tackle this problem? Maybe it's a scientific imagination today, but tomorrow, it may be reality. As a kid, I never thought of that India and US going to be performing joint research and coming to the platform like this and so on. Even a few years ago, I never thought about it because when we were doing the research for Department of Defense, we never even thought about exchanging the ideas in the scientific platform and so on. I'm speaking on behalf of the United States now. But things change. We're all here as a scientific community and as a single entity. What can we do from here? So these are the things that I would like to put together on behalf of my colleagues and keep thinking about it. Any specific questions for all three of us? Please. Yes, sir. By the way, it's a pleasure to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Professor Guais. It's a good lecture regarding organic electronics. What you showed, that is regarding this pentacene-based organic electronics. But these pentacenes is too, they are not stable. So what is the strategy we are going to make for this stabilized organic electronics? Because as sir suggested, quantum dots of semiconductors, quantum dots of graphene, whether we can select hydroquinones and other very stable conjugated compounds and have the embedded quantum dots like graphene quantum dots or semiconductor quantum dots. So these are going to make miracles in organic electronics, and then we can stabilize this. I think this is my view. Wherever I have seen this pentacenes, when I have scanned the literature, but we are not getting the stability of the pentacenes. That is I think that is the problem. Whether I'm right or not, I don't know.
Yes, I mean, pentacene is, more like a test system that people use, and you're absolutely right. Using different kinds of even 2D materials, if you're using molydisulfide with these kind of transistors, then you can get much better carrier mobilities, for instance. And as a matter of fact, I think very recently they have demonstrated a 1 nanometer thick molydisulfide transistor. Right, so there's obviously many opportunities, not just with the organics, but combining it with the 2D materials. And even in the organic world, the advantage there is if you use some of the solution processable materials. Pentacene is not the best example because you have to evaporate it or use molecular beam epitaxy. And in that respect, I would think that many of the donor acceptor polymers, one of these, I can give you a name, it's called this diketo DPP, which is a molecule which has been known in chemistry for more than 50 years. This is what is used in car paints. And we know, even, I used to live in Arizona. Car paints are very robust, except it was not electronic, and it became an electronic material only like 10 years ago. So the idea is many of these conjugated polymers, which are solution processable, can be quite stable as well. Yeah. Right, pentacene is not the good example here, and in any case, it's not solution processable, so.
Any others? Yes, sir.
A question to Dr. Guha. You clearly brought out that the future of organic electronics is very bright, though silicon electronics are going to remain. So we have this very ambitious India semiconductor program, which you would be doing. So what is your recommendation? How can we leapfrog? We don't have those commercial paths at present. So how can we make use of the future of this organic electronics for setting up, new kind of fabs, new technologies where we can leapfrog? What is the suggestion?
Right. So one thing I know is, of course, in India, there are some excellent groups who are synthesizing these materials. They are one of the best in the world, I think. The one advantage here is you also don't need these large fabs, right? Because you can do a lot with low-cost technology like roll-to-roll printing or inkjet printing. And I think there are also many companies here, I'm not exactly sure, but I know in Bangalore there are a few companies which are doing this roll-to-roll processing. So in that sense, you have the infrastructure, and we don't even need very expensive fabs for some of the electronics that I discussed. And this is, I think, the perfect place to sort of expand this technology.
Okay, so we will have better interaction with you. And
sure, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So, great lecture by all three of you. My question was to Mukul sir. Sir, the question is that how would AI-based hardware accelerators aid in the automotive sector, and how is CCD and hardware accelerator different? Is there any similarity, or they are entirely different?
CCD is an imaging device, right? It's only doing one part of the job. It's just converting the photons to electrons. Your accelerator is working on a digital data. So the processing in between, you have a processing electronics which converts those electrons into digital data and gives us digital data. Where can you use AI? If you saw the overflow of the ADAS, the imaging system is the first part of it. Entire decisive network can be AI-based, right? And it is going to be AI-based. So the kind of information that you're going to capture, see, if you get information from 20 such cameras, you need fast processing logic to decide which information to act on, right? So you cannot have conventional imaging processing tools that's going to work on 20 cameras. Maybe it will work with 1 or 2 cameras, but those days are gone. Look at your mobile phone, you have 4 cameras in that. Right?
Thank you, sir. I also would like to ask Dr. Sankar. I started the discussion and then went to addressing the topics by community as a whole. Then I will stop. Any other questions in the meantime? Anyway, although it's the imagination right now, do you think that like in future we can have sensors like that where the car can be just going and
the avionics guys can comment on that, right? I'm a semiconductor person, right? So semiconductor cannot fly. We always take baby steps, right? So I don't see cars flying, but I do see cars going autonomous in India.
Right.
Any other question, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, we will take one more question.
My question is from Professor Gua. It was a wonderful talk. I seriously liked that talk personally. And I want to ask regarding this ice lithography technique which you mentioned. Is it commercially available anywhere so far, or what are the advantages and like what will be the like how can we take it forward? What is the future of the TIES technology?
Thank you very much for this question. Commercially, it is not. And it's kind of interesting, you know, if you look at the first paper was in 2005. And as I mentioned, there are only two groups that are doing it. There's one in Westlake, China, and then one is in Denmark. And one of the issues is that you have to sort of reconfigure your SEM, right? Because you need a metal deposition chamber, you need a load lock, you have to move the sample back and forth. So commercially, it is still not available, but China and Denmark, they're really trying to push this technology. So I hope this happens in the US as well very soon.
Thank you very much. Any other question? We will take one last question. Yes, at last. At last. And please introduce yourself, sir, and then proceed for the question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Siva Prasad, Channel Lens.
The answer is you can do any kind of pattern, right? So we're just about starting.
Wonderful, distinguished speakers on stage. We just had a wonderful session, very informative session. Thank you very much, our distinguished speakers. We learned a lot, and that's the only motive of this workshop. May I request Sunita ma'am, please come on stage and help us to express our gratitude, the token of gratitude. And everybody, a big round of applause for them. It was an informative and very innovative session for all of us. I request Sunita ma'am to felicitate Ramana sir. Sir, please come at front. Yes. And let's have a picture, group picture also at last. Thank you very much, sir. So you have to stay for a group picture. Now may I request Suchi Guha ma'am, please come at front. I request Sunita ma'am to express gratitude with the token of gratitude and respect. Now may I request Professor Mukul Sarkar. So please come at front. Thank you. Thank you very much. So before we proceed any further, I request, let's have a group picture together. Once again, a big thank you to all our distinguished speakers for this very informative session. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed for a lunch break of an hour. Please enjoy the break. And let me tell you once again, at 5:30, we will have our breakout sessions. And it will be for 5 different topics. And for any further information, you can visit the website also. So now please enjoy the lunch. At 2 p.m. sharp, we will proceed with our next session. Thank you. you.